Welcome to Midnight Murmur. Here, the night comes alive with chilling tales and spine-tingling stories. If you crave the thrill of the unknown and the eerie whisper of the supernatural, you've found your new haunt. Join us as we dive into the darkest corners of the human mind, unraveling short horror stories that will keep you up at night. Hit that subscribe button, turn off the lights, and let the murmur begin. Hello, I would like a pizza. Hello, I would like to order a pizza, is what I have been hearing all day, and I cannot believe it. The violence within household groups from both men and women is just staggering. When they add on pepperoni or other items on the pizza, it just sends shivers down my spine. Sometimes it's the woman who makes the call, other times it's the man, and now and then it's a child. When a child makes a call ordering for pizza, my faith in humanity just goes down. I wish I was on the front line of the police again. Instead, I had been put down to office duty and answering phone calls. Hello, I would like to order a pizza. I want a pizza. That is all I have been hearing all day, and I am tempted to just get off my seat and get into a car and drive down to one of these houses and just lay out justice into the abuser. I kind of regret joining the police in the first place and witnessing the things I have witnessed. It's quite traumatizing. Going home after a night of violence, crime and murder will always be surreal, and to try and go to sleep after all of that is just hard. Just constantly more pizza orders with sides, which just disgusts me even more as it tells me that the violence has turned gory. Why can't people just be nice? I then told myself that if I get one more call that orders a pizza, then I am getting up from my seat and going down to the house and shooting the abuser. I will bring justice on my own terms, and when another call came through and another so-called pizza order, I got up from my seat and went down to the very house the call had came from and knocked on the front door. The call came from a woman ordering a pizza, so I knew the man was the abuser. When the man opened the door and looked confused with a 30-pound note in his hands, he asked me, "Where's the pizza?" And as I shot him down, his wife screamed in horror. I then remembered that I don't work for the police anymore and that I work in a pizza joint. It was just instinctive or automatic for me to react like that for working so long in the police. Some things are hard to shake off. Unseen exposure. Max Burns is an amateur photographer. Though his profession is not photography, he does take photos as a hobby. On one of his days off, he received a call to take some photos of an abandoned house. The person who requested this of him was a friend named Violet Moss. She is a realtor who flips houses and resells them to make a profit. Max agreed and went to the address Violet had given him. Upon arrival, the house came into view. He had never seen something so unique. It was a cliff-anchored house. This type of home is only seen sometimes due to the frequent landslides in the area. Pulling into a makeshift parking space, he parked his car, grabbed his gear, and walked up to the door. A note was left on the door telling Max where the key was. At the bottom of the note, Violet apologized for not being there since she had to draw up the final paperwork. Retrieving the key from under a flower pot, he went inside. Shutting the door behind him, he flipped the light switch for the lights that slowly blinked to life. Setting up his gear, he began to go through each room, taking photos. It was relatively empty and seemed odd to Max since Violet always decorated, especially if she would make a sale. With the bottom floor done, he headed upstairs, cutting the lights off. Stepping into the doorway of one of the bedrooms, he snapped a photo, and his camera began beeping at him. Confused, he looked at the screen flashing with the low battery symbol. He sighed, took out another battery pack, and replaced it. The camera was fully charged, so why did it suddenly become drained? Shaking his head, Max continued finishing up the upstairs, then made his way back down. Walking to the kitchen counter, he opened his laptop and inserted the memory card from his camera to review and edit the photos he had taken. Looking through the images, he came across the one he had taken of the first upstairs bedroom. Inside the room, there was a figure. Static and gray, the person was about average height and thin, with their head hanging down. There was no way this was a ghost. Max didn't believe in the supernatural and blamed the camera for malfunctioning due to the drained battery, so he would retake the photo. Max sent Violet an email with the photos he approved, and she quickly replied, asking him if he was still inside the house. He replied, telling her he was still inside the house finishing up. Violet, in a panic, told him to get out of there. A creak from the stairs made him turn as he took out his phone and snapped a picture with its camera. Max cursed, forgetting his flash was on, and tried to take another when footsteps thumped across the floor towards him. He dropped his phone and backed away from the island counter. What had made its way down to him? Max's phone began to ring, startling him. From where he stood, he could see Violet trying to call him. Max cursed under his breath. "Okay, Max, don't be such a baby. Ghosts are not real. Just grab your phone and answer it," he said aloud to himself, taking a deep breath before grabbing his phone and quickly answering it. "V. Violet. Maxie, is everything okay? I'm on my way to your location. I need you to grab your stuff and go wait in your car," she tells him, trying not to express the rising panic in her voice. "Is something wrong with the house?" Max asked, looking around and listening to his surroundings as he packed his stuff. "Just trust me and get out." She ended the call, and Max did as he was told. He put his bag over his shoulder, and his cell phone was the last thing he reached for. The lights in the room flickered before going out, ultimately leaving him in nothing but the darkness of the kitchen. When Max let out an exhale of air, he could see his breath, making him visibly shiver. Keeping his eyes on the middle of the room, he walked backward, reaching his hand behind him to open the door. Once the door was open, he stepped out, almost tripping in the process, and shut the door. Moving quickly, he went to his car, opened the door, and sat inside. Max tossed his bag into the passenger seat and took out his phone to look at his photo of the stairs. What he looked at differed from the one he had taken from the bedroom. There was a man with no head, and his body was covered with something black. It dripped onto the floor, and the axe he carried was covered in dried blood. Looking up from his phone, he heard the house's front door open. He watched as it stayed open for a while until it slammed shut. Could the ghost not leave the house? If that was the case, Max was grateful. Up beside him, Violet parked next to him. They sat in her car and talked briefly about what had just happened, and Max showed her the photos. "This is just crazy." Violet paused and looked at Max. "I'm so sorry this happened to you. I knew strange things were happening, but you got them on camera. Didn't anyone else try taking photos or recordings?" he questioned. Violet shook her head. "No, my crew was scared, so I looked into its history. Once I found out what happened, I looked for a buyer immediately. The person that I found deals with this sort of thing. Is there a person who deals with those things in there? Did Violet find an exorcist or a medium? Hopefully, that person is both." "What exactly did you find out about this place?" Max asked, putting his phone and laptop away. Violet gripped the steering wheel, looking over at him with a frown. That man in the photo killed his family in that house. His wife had been cheating on him, and he found out. She began to explain. Violet slowly took her hands off the wheel and placed them in her lap. He then hung himself above the stairs. When a family friend found them, he'd been hanging there so long that his head detached. His wife was practically decapitated upstairs. Thankfully, they didn't have children. She added. Max shuddered, thankful he had taken the pictures and got out of there when he did. He'd hate to think about what would have happened if he had stayed inside a little longer. "You don't have any more houses like this, do you?" Max asked nervously. Violet shook her head. No, but if I do, I'll warn you first. I'd appreciate that. He sighs, leaning his head back against the seat and closing his eyes. This was enough excitement for one day. Hopefully, the person who bought this house knows what they're doing. A week later, Violet contacted him. Hey Violet, did the new owners have any luck? Max asked as he headed inside from his regular 9 to 5 job for the day. Yes, but I have another favor to ask, she replied, hearing 2 other people in the background. Oh, sure. What do you need exactly? Max nervously swallowed, tossing his keys onto the dish in the middle of his coffee table. How do you feel about doing spirit photography? As a profession? The owner says they would pay you a lot. Max pondered this for a moment. If it paid enough, he could quit his office job, especially if this person bought homes like this often. Max Burns, a deep, gruff voice said on the phone now, making him sit upright. My name is Andy Graves, and I need your assistance with my business ventures. You'll be paid for your time and will constantly be on the move. Are you okay with these terms? Surprised, he visibly nodded, even if Andy couldn't see him. Yes. Good. See you at the airport a few days from now. Monday 6 in the morning, don't be late. Andy ended the call, and Max sat on his couch in shock. This is a full-time profession now, he thought. Monday came sooner than expected, and he was rushing out the door. He looked at his apartment from over his shoulder before shutting the door one last time. He had already said his goodbyes to Violet the day before, so there would be no tears. When he arrived at the airport, he didn't know what to expect when looking for Andy Graves, but for some reason, he knew it was him when they met. Andy Graves? You must be Max Burns. It will be a pleasure working with you, spirit photographer. Max nodded, feeling a shiver go down his spine as they shook hands. Just what had he gibber papaya into? Night shift. Working the graveyard shift as a cop sucks for a myriad of reasons, chief among them being the eeriness of the night. Now, saying that might make me sound like a baby considering that I'm no small dude, but it's true. Something about being stuck in your car, with no human life in sight, has an almost alien feeling to it. I'm sure it would help if I lived in an area that wasn't as heavily forested as Wyoming. But as it stands, if there's a light on near me, I almost can't see it with how dense the foliage is. Most nights, there's nothing to do, so it's just me and the silence. I usually take the time to catch up on a show I'm watching or finish a book. On the off chance I do get a call, it's always something small like a wellness check or a suspicious character outside a bar. I'm always happy to take these calls, though, as it gets me back towards populated areas, rather than some gravel road where they have me scouting for speeders. It's not an exciting job, but it pays the bills. It happened 2 days ago, on a relatively warm night. I was working my first night shift in a while, after getting back from vacation. Jimmy, the officer who replaced me while I was out, told me that he finally understood what I was talking about when I said it was creepy. I chuckled, assuring him that I would take over for a while, and advised him to bring something to do next time to keep his mind off it. If anyone were to understand what the transition from day to night shift was like, it would be me. So I tried to make him comfortable. After all, if he started taking them more, I wouldn't have to sit in the darkness as much. He handed me the keys, and I had an idea. This was the only night shift I was scheduled for that week. Why not make it a little more bearable? I decided to invite him along. He could either sit at a desk all night in a dimly lit precinct with only one other person, or hang out and shoot the shit in the cruiser. Honestly, I don't think the blinding white walls of the station are that much more comforting than the darkness, and I think he agreed because he accepted the offer pretty quickly. We parked on one of our designated hiding spots and settled in, watching some shitty horror movie and cracking open a few beers. Sure, we shouldn't have been doing that, but who was going to arrest us for it? We weren't small guys, either, so it would take more than a couple of beers to get us tipsy. We also didn't expect to be moving much until my work phone rang. I sighed, rubbed my eyes, and answered it. It was already 3 a.m., so at least we'd made it halfway through the shift before something happened. I immediately heard giggling on the other end. I said hello a few times, and was about to hang up when I heard a voice on the other end of the line. It was Brian, the only other officer on duty that night, and he was in charge of manning the station's phone. Usually, he was as monotone as a depressed robot, so to hear him laugh was already weird. "Hey Tom, how's it going?" "I can't complain. Just living the high life with Jimmy here." "What's up?" "You're not gonna believe this shit. I got an emergency call from the old Amic factory on McHaben Road." "How?" "That place doesn't have any power, or phones even. That's why I'm laughing my ass off. The person who called said they broke into the place to try and steal equipment, and now they're somehow stuck inside." It was silent in the cruiser for a second. Jimmy and I slowly turned to look at each other, and then, almost simultaneously, we burst out laughing. "You're shitting me." "I'm dead serious." When I got the call, I almost pissed myself trying not to laugh at the poor bastard. Jimmy jokingly slugged me in the shoulder as Brian began to talk again. "Anyways, do me a favor and go and help the guy get out of there. It's your choice whether you want to arrest him for trespassing or not, but he's had a bad enough night as is, by the sounds of it. We'll take care of it. Beats giving another speeding ticket. I don't know if I'm going to be able to keep a straight face, though. I sure as shit wouldn't be able to. Give me a call back if you need backup, all right? I'll have to call the precinct up in Pinedale. If you do, they have their parade this week, so I'm sure they've got a few guys to spare." "Sounds good, Brian. We'll keep you posted." I hung up and flicked the cruiser's lights on, piercing through the darkness. We peeled out onto the road, making sure not to hit any deer along the way. It was only about a 10-minute drive, but you never know. We pulled into the bramble-covered entrance to the building, and I got out of the car to undo the rusted chain blocking the road. The place had been abandoned for 10 years, after Amic moved its drilling operations up north and took half the town's population with them. Now, the place was just a drinking spot for local teens, and it showed, with the amount of graffiti sprayed along the sides. We got out of the cruiser, flicked our flashlights on, and started looking for an entrance. Jimmy was noticeably on edge, probably because he didn't know this place existed. He was relatively new to the area, and I'm pretty sure this was his first time having to get out of the car on the night shift, although I didn't ask. He went around the left side of the building, while I took the right, both of us looking for a rusted door or a busted window. I was peeling brambles off of my shorts when I heard Jimmy start yelling. I immediately hightailed it back towards the other side of the building, hand on my holster, preparing for the worst. Was this a trap? Maybe the dude we came here to find was some sicko looking to hurt us, or worse. I sprinted around the corner, shining my flashlight in front of me and expecting the worst. My flashlight illuminated Jimmy, who was doubled over laughing. I was confused and immediately asked if he was all right. He looked up at me with the widest grin I'd ever seen him sporting. "I totally got you." I was relieved that nothing actually happened, but was mostly annoyed that he did that to me. It was almost 4 o'clock in the morning, for God's sake, and we were on the tail of some idiot in the middle of an abandoned warehouse. For a second, I'd thought he was getting attacked, and would be lying in a bloody heap by the time I got over to him. I think he saw that I was pissed, because his face immediately sank, and he started to apologize, saying he was just trying to lighten the mood. I took a deep breath and smiled at him. I assured him that I'd get him back at some point, and to just focus on getting in for now. We found a broken window that we assumed he'd climbed in through, and shined our flashlights on the floor inside to make sure we weren't about to step on nails or something. As we climbed into the place, I radioed Brian and asked him to call a few other officers over to us, just in case something went wrong. After the shit Jimmy pulled, I was on edge that something bad would actually happen, so I figured it was better to be safe than sorry. The power in the place still didn't work in hindsight. I have no idea why I even bothered checking, so it looked like we were going to have to put our flashlights to work. We called out a few times into the darkness, seeing if we'd get a response, but to no avail. We walked past the old drills and ore processors, our feet clicking against the concrete floor. After searching the bulk of the main room, we headed for the hallway at the very back of the factory. I knew this place pretty well, since I'd been called there during the daytime a few years back to clear out some drunk partiers who'd snuck in. Still, it was a whole different beast at night, and the fact that the hallway immediately branched into 3 more didn't help. This is where we made our first mistake, and it was a pretty stupid one. We decided to split up. I know, it's how horror movies start, and how characters die, but we were both tired, and our energy drinks were wearing off. We agreed that we'd keep our radios on at all times, and let each other know if we found the guy. At this point, I'd assumed that he'd found his way out and ran into the woods in fear of being arrested. But we still had to sweep the place just in case. I wasn't planning on arresting the guy, as I figured that he'd had a bad enough night at that point, and the old equipment he was planning on taking wasn't of any use to anyone anymore, so I would have let him off with a warning. Now, though, I was starting to change my mind. I didn't want to have to search the entire back half of this place, especially given the fact that there were 3 floors worth of rooms here. It didn't help that the building was split into 2 sides that weren't connected, so if one of us found something, the other would have to walk all the way over to them. I was starting to understand why this place wasn't used anymore. Every time I passed a room, I'd shine my flashlight in and call out. As evidenced by Jimmy's voice over the radio, he had a similar system going on. When I reached the first room of the 2nd floor, he was already on the 3rd, so I warned him to slow down a little bit just to make sure that each room was completely clear. I was met with complete silence and repeated myself. Still, nothing. "Hey, Tom, I see something." "What is it?" "Down the hall from me. There's a hand sticking out of the doorway." I stopped in my tracks. "What do you mean?" "There's a hand waggling its finger at me." "I'll be right over." "Don't go near it. Don't do shit. Slowly back up." In fact, I started towards the stairs, admittedly slower than I should have. At this point, I was creeped out, but the rational side of me was still telling me that someone had gotten stuck and was motioning for Jimmy to come closer to help them. When I reached the 1st floor of my building, the other side of me started screaming at me to get moving, and that's the side I started listening to. As I approached the entrance to the other building, my radio suddenly erupted. "Tom." "What? What is it?" "There's a face. There's someone looking at me." I didn't respond. I just broke into a sprint towards the access door at the end of the hall. I grabbed the handle and pushed. It didn't budge. I rammed my shoulder into it, screaming Jimmy's name. Behind the door, I heard faint yelling. The door finally gave out, and I started sprinting up the dark staircase. I took my gun out of my holster. Whatever was going on up there, it wasn't good. I reached the entrance of the 3rd floor, and again, the door was locked. I bashed my shoulder into the door once again, calling his name. This time, though, there was no response, no screaming, just silence. I drew my pistol and unloaded almost the entire clip into the lock. The door still didn't budge. Something had to be blocking it from the other side. I slammed against the door so hard that things started flying off my belt. First my knife, then my taser, then my flashlight. I stopped for a second to pick it up, but it just kept rolling until it hit the edge of the stairwell and fell down. I couldn't see shit anymore, but I didn't have time to go get it. The door was starting to push open, and I had to get through. I kicked it so hard, I thought I broke my ankle, but I didn't care. It finally caved in enough for me to slip through into the hallway. I once again called out Jimmy's name, and as my eyes adjusted to the darkness, I saw a light on at the end of the hallway. Not a flashlight, but a very dimly lit room. Standing in the doorway was a silhouette. It had to be him. I called out to him again, but didn't step closer. The silence was broken when the giggling started. It was faint enough that I couldn't tell if it was him, but it sounded like it. The giggling turned to laughter, and he started to move, but didn't leave the doorway. He was just moving in place, jerking from side to side. It looked like he was dancing. I lowered my gun and called out to him again. I knew what was happening. He was fucking with me. All of this was a setup to prank me again. I was royally pissed off and started screaming down the hallway. Are you fucking kidding me? I thought someone was attacking you. Dude, I fucking told you earlier to stop messing around. And now you nearly give me a heart attack by doing this shit? What the fuck is wrong with you? I put my gun back in my belt and turned back towards the door. I'd had more than enough for one night. I'm going outside to wait for the backup to get here, and going with them back to our station. When you're ready to stop fucking around, take the car and don't talk to me for a week. This is seriously fucked up. I stormed out the broken door and picked up all of my stuff. I climbed back out through the window and stood in the darkness in front of the factory, waiting for backup to arrive. Luckily, they were well on their way already and got there about 5 minutes after I got outside. I hopped into the back seat of their cruiser and buckled myself in. Whenever you're ready, you can drive me back to the station. It's 20 minutes down the main road. The officer behind the wheel turned to look at me, then turned back towards the wheel and pointed to the factory. Don't you want to wait for your partner? It looks like he's at the window up there. I rolled the window down and looked outside. Sure enough, there was a faint light coming from one of the windows, what looked to be a flashlight beam, illuminating someone's silhouette. He'll take our car back to the station. I'm pissed off at him right now, so he can take care of it. With a nod, the officer shifted into reverse, and we backed out onto the main road. Once we got back to the precinct, I thanked them for the lift, and immediately hopped into my truck and drove back home. I was exhausted, and didn't really care to wait for Jimmy to bring the car in. Jimmy didn't show up for work yesterday, and he didn't return the car either. We thought he'd just taken a sick day and forgot to phone in, or maybe he was scared to face me after his little prank backfired. Everyone I told about it seemed to be on my side, and maybe he knew I'd tell people about it, so I thought he was afraid of corrective action. At least, that was my theory yesterday. He didn't show up today either, and everyone started to get a bit worried, even me. We sent a couple of officers out to the factory to see if he had left in the cruiser, or took an Uber home and left it there. Sure enough, it was parked in the same spot. When they saw this, they phoned me to come in to help search the area, just in case. It was my day off, so I was irritated, but I did hope he was okay, so I relented. We searched the entire factory, and didn't find anything until we got to the third-floor hallway that we'd been on a few days ago. I got up the stairs last, and found one officer vomiting in the corner of the stairwell, and the other shielding his eyes in disgust. I pushed past them and walked into the hallway. The floor was stained with a trail of blood leading towards the end of the hall. There, hanging from the doorway, was Jimmy. He'd been absolutely mangled. His stomach was eviscerated, and his eyes and tongue were missing. Most notably, though, were his arms and legs. The veins had been almost completely ripped from them, and braided so tightly together that they formed makeshift ropes. Seeing this, I didn't immediately join the other officer in vomiting. I just stood there, completely stunned. That changed, though, when I walked into the room behind his body. Above him, attached to the doorway, was a makeshift pulley system. A system that his veins had been run through almost like he was a puppet. Operation Global Dawn. In the year 2027, the world stood on the brink of a new era. For decades, the global elite had been quietly orchestrating a series of transformative changes designed to reshape the world order. Their plan, however, required a catalyst, an event so profound that it would shake the foundations of society and pave the way for their envisioned future. This catalyst was code-named Operation Global Dawn. The operation commenced on a seemingly ordinary day in January. Without warning, a massive cyberattack struck the heart of the global financial system. Banks, stock exchanges, and financial institutions across the world found themselves under siege from an invisible enemy. The attack was unprecedented in its scale and precision. Within hours, chaos reigned as financial networks collapsed, rendering electronic transactions impossible and plunging markets into disarray. Panic spread like wildfire. People rushed to atoms, only to find them inoperable. Stock markets crashed, wiping out trillions of dollars in wealth. Governments scrambled to respond, but the sheer scale of the attack left them paralyzed. The global economy teetered on the brink of collapse. In the midst of the turmoil, a narrative began to emerge. Intelligence agencies pointed the finger at a rogue state, accusing it of masterminding the cyberattack with the help of a shadowy network of hackers. The media amplified these claims, creating a climate of fear and anger. Calls for retribution grew louder, and the world braced for conflict. Behind the scenes, the architects of Operation Global Dawn moved swiftly. The global elite, a consortium of the world's most powerful individuals and organizations, had anticipated this moment for years. They had a plan ready to restore order and implement sweeping changes under the guise of responding to the crisis. The first major announcement came from the World Economic Forum, an influential body comprising leaders from various industries and governments. They proposed the introduction of a global digital currency, designed to replace the myriad national currencies that had become destabilized by the attack. This new currency, they argued, would provide a stable and secure means of conducting transactions in an increasingly interconnected world. The digital currency, dubbed the global credit, was more than just a financial tool. It was a means of control. Unlike traditional currencies, the global credit was entirely digital and tracked by a centralized global bank. Every transaction was monitored, providing unprecedented oversight of economic activity. The elite touted the currency as a solution to economic instability, but it also served their interests by consolidating financial power. As the global credit rolled out, the elite unveiled the second phase of their plan, a comprehensive global surveillance system. Leveraging advancements in artificial intelligence and drone technology, they proposed a network capable of monitoring the entire planet in real time. This system, they claimed, was necessary to prevent future attacks and ensure compliance with new global policies. Drones equipped with high-resolution cameras and AI-driven analytics began patrolling cities and remote areas alike. These autonomous sentinels could identify individuals, track movements, and detect suspicious activities. Combined with existing digital surveillance, the system created a panoptic in a world where privacy was a relic of the past. With surveillance in place, the elite turned their attention to energy. They announced an ambitious initiative to transition the world to sustainable energy sources, phasing out fossil fuels entirely. This plan, they argued, would address climate change and reduce dependency on finite resources. Central to this initiative was the development of nuclear fusion technology, promising an almost limitless supply of clean energy. Governments and corporations invested heavily in fusion research, driven by the promise of a utopian future. Fusion reactors began to replace coal plants and oil rigs, transforming the energy landscape. The transition, however, was tightly controlled. Access to fusion technology was restricted, ensuring that the elite maintained their grip on the world's energy supply. The final phase of Operation Global Dawn addressed population control. Citing concerns about overpopulation and resource depletion, the elite introduced policies aimed at stabilizing global population growth. Incentives for smaller families were coupled with the promotion of advanced reproductive technologies. These measures, they claimed, would ensure a sustainable future for humanity. As these changes unfolded, the world adapted to its new reality. The initial chaos of the cyber attack gave way to a period of enforced stability. The global credit became the standard for transactions, the surveillance network a fact of life, and sustainable energy the norm. Population policies slowly reshaped societal norms. Yet, beneath the surface, discontent simmered. Many saw the elite's actions as a power grab, an erosion of freedoms in the name of security and progress. Protests erupted in various parts of the world, but they were swiftly quelled by the surveillance state. Voices of dissent were marginalized, and the narrative of a new world order prevailed. The truth about Operation Global Dawn remained hidden from the public. The cyber attack, far from being the work of a rogue state, had been orchestrated by the elite themselves. It was a false flag event designed to create a pretext for their plans. The global economy's collapse was a necessary sacrifice to bring about the changes they desired. In the aftermath, the global elite continued to shape the world according to their vision. The centralized control of finance, surveillance, energy, and population policies created a tightly regulated society. Innovation and progress flourished, but at the cost of individual freedoms and privacy. Operation Global Dawn marked the dawn of a new era, a world where the lines between power and control blurred, and the promise of a better future came with the price of autonomy. The global elite had succeeded in their plan, but the true cost of their success would be felt for generations to come. There's a reason for my fear of attics. Nobody is truly fearless. That is something I learned early on in my life. When it comes to myself, I have 3 major fears. I have a healthy fear of heights and a less healthy fear of spiders. But there is one fear that has the other 2 pale in comparison. It is a fear that leaves me paralyzed whenever I see them, and that fear is attics. I have a good reason for all of my fears, but my reason for having a bitter hatred for attics is a lot deeper than any of you would think. But with that being said, let me tell you my reasoning. Attics have always had this eerie vibe to me. Even basements tend to unnerve me at times. I remember when my fear really started, and it was in May of 2019. I was living with my dad at the time. The house we lived in was built in the 1970s more than likely. In the daytime, it had a feeling of peace and serenity to it. But when it came to the nighttime, it turned into a hellish landscape. The house as a whole had an unnaturally creepy feeling to it at night, but the fear I felt in my own bedroom was on a completely different level. The room had old carpeted floor and aging plain white painted walls, and this room also had a huge closet and a decent-sized bathroom in it. But it had one more thing in it, an attic. Everything about this attic creeped me out, from the worn-out wooden ladder to the dark miniature space in the attic room itself. I always got a bad or even haunting vibe walking under it every time, and I think I was right to feel this way. At some point during that May, I was home alone talking to a friend of mine with my dog lying next to me on the couch. I cannot recall what we were discussing. I believe it was about the possibility of us hanging out and getting drunk at some point in the future. But what I can recall is the noise, a loud noise. I remember my dog started going berserk, barking at the wall above us both. I calmed her down and went to go check out the attic. I look back at this and fully regret this decision. I proceeded to pull on the attic rope and pulled down the ladder. I then walked on this ladder and my phone light on and at full power. I looked around the room and noticed something. A box had been knocked over and the glass in it completely shattered and all over the place. I thought it fell possibly because the box wasn't positioned right on top of the other box it was previously on, but I wanted to see if I could find out exactly what caused it. I panned across the room with my phone light, and I found the answer. My light had shone on the middle of the room, and at that moment I noticed that something was crawling on all fours towards me fast. I yelled, "Oh shit," and accidentally tripped on the ladder and fell down to the ground on my right shoulder. A little boy then quickly crawled down the ladder, looked at me sternly, and then ran out my front door. I knew my shoulder was hurting badly from the fall, but that problem seemed minor at that moment. After a few minutes, I got up and closed the attic and closed and locked the door. I didn't sleep that night. I don't think anyone would blame me for that. But ever since that night, I don't go near attics anymore. Regan's hate. I was 8 years old when my sister Regan died, and I'm not sorry to say that it was a happy time in my life. She was always a terrible person, as in she would always hit me. Not like a sibling play fight kind of thing, like a real bald fist, hair pulling and toss me around violently. Our parents couldn't control her. She would go against their word, and even took to drugs at 16. She would even go as far as putting holes in the walls and trashing up the house. She cost thousands of dollars in repairs, but I really can't say how my parents felt about her passing. Things were quiet and peaceful for a good few years. I was an only child and got all the attention, which was a good thing. House was always clean and no drama at all, so it was really a blessing she passed away. Sad, but not too sad to say. About a month after my 10th birthday, I started to notice small bruises on my arms and on my neck as well. My mother thought I was being bullied in school, but the honest truth was that I had no clue where they were coming from. The next few weeks they kept reappearing, and the pain of them had started to get worse. Even the doctor couldn't explain it, and just chalked it up to lack of iron. But that really wasn't the case either. Then one night, I was laying in bed reading a comic book with a small night light, and that's when I felt my bed nudge forward slightly. My heart skipped a quick beat at that moment, and it happened again as I looked around my room. My bedroom door was slightly open, so there was some light coming in, and suddenly my entire bed had started to shake violently. I screamed as I grabbed the back of the bed frame, screaming for my dad, and he comes rushing in to catch the last few seconds of it shaking. My mother followed a few seconds later, and I told them what happened. Even with my father just witnessing those few seconds, he was in denial and blamed me for overreacting. The next night, I decided to sleep on the couch for the fear of the same thing happening. So I set up a plan of movies to watch with snacks and sodas to keep me going for as late as I can go. Going in midway through the second movie, I passed out with a bag of chips on my lap and a soda in my hand. I could somewhat hear my own snoring and feel my own drool rolling off my lip, but was way too tired to do anything about it. I could feel myself slipping deeper into my sleep as the seconds went off and the TV noise fading in the darkness of my eyes, and before I knew it, I felt a pair of hands pressing down on my chest heavily. I woke up and gasped only to see a black figure of something holding down my chest, barely able to breathe, and for the life of me, I couldn't move an inch. My entire body grew a burning cold just by the touch of this thing. The most scariest part about this was that this all happened within 5 seconds. Those seconds felt as if time had stopped and lasted for an hour. I can't explain how that was possible, but the quiet fear of looking up at this hollow thing pushing down on my chest was the scariest experience I've had at that point. When I was finally able to move, I jumped off the couch and slammed my foot on the corner of the coffee table and crawled out of that living room and up the stairs as quick as I could. Trying not to disturb my sleeping parents, I ran to my room and jumped under my bed covers, cold and hands numb from this shadow person. I cried that whole night thinking back at what I saw, and I tell you now, I don't like it, not ever, but looking at that thing. I swear it looked like my deceased sister. I can vaguely see its face, but I swear I can make out what it looked like and how I know also. That's how my sister used to hold me down and try to cave in my chest, which was a harsh pain for me. After a week after that first experience, nothing else had happened. I can't tell you how paranoid I grew of seeing that thing again. I started sleeping with an open Bible next to my bed, a crucifix on my door and above my bed, and of course a baseball bat by my nightstand. How could I tell my mother and father about what had happened? They knew something was up cause of how quiet I had been that whole time, but we all just tried to move on with our lives and pretend that my sister was never around or even existed. Of course, that was until the night she came back. What happened just had to happen on the most typical of rain and stormy nights, so it gets a little dramatic like a movie or something. I was settled in bed with my comic books and Mom and Dad were just getting ready to set themselves down in their room. I had my door wide open, and a little time passed, and the whole house grew quiet as I read while listening to the rain and thunder outside. Just as I was turning the page, I suddenly hear my mom scream or yelp, whatever it was. It made me jump out of my bed and grab my Bible, running towards the parent bedroom all the way down the hall. I pushed open the door and found my dad holding my mom in their bed. I thought maybe she just had a nightmare, but as I could see through my peripheral side view, I noticed a patch of black mass curled up in the corner, its long hair draped over its face and hugging its knees, rocking back and forth. My mom and dad got out of their bed and slowly made their way towards me as they kept an eye on this black mass. We all make our way to the hallway and run down the stairs and into the kitchen in a hurry. My parents quickly rummaging through the drawers trying to find their car keys. I looked down the hall while trying to catch my breath from the immense fear I was beginning to feel build up in my chest. Breathing got really heavy, as if that thing was pushing down on my chest again. I turned and looked down the hall and could see the shadow turning the corner, standing there watching us look back at it. My dad wraps his arms around my mother, and I, as my dad yells, "You can't be here anymore, Regan. You're dead. Now leave." Mom starts sobbing into Dad's chest as I watch this thing tilt its head slightly, and it begins to scratch at its own arms and slowly backs into the wall. "Leave, Regan. No more." Dad yells once more, and this shadow disappears into the wall. After that chilling experience, my parents had started putting up crucifixes all through the house, one for every room and daily prayers for each room. We've never been religious, but this was a new thing for us, and if it kept the bad spirit away, then I'm sure as hell we needed it. But what really got me, after many years, my mother passed, and it was just me and my dad. One day we sat and talked about what happened. It turns out that whatever that thing was, that angry spirit of my sister Regan, it was actually haunting my parents' bedroom for that whole week. They didn't say anything because they didn't want to frighten me with me being so young. My sister Regan or thing would cry softly in the corner of their bedroom until morning, scratching itself and pulling out its hair. My sister was really just evil, and the day she died, she left her rage for us to deal with. That's what I believe anyway. I can't mention half the things she has done, but what I can say is that the world would be better off without her. But as for the hateful spirit, I really hope it's not back at that house, cause whoever lives there has my sympathy, Regan. May you not rest in peace. A mammoth's perspective. I am a mammoth. It's no secret from my long fur and large tusks of my family. We are aware of the many predators in our lands, but he always keep in watch as my niece was just born a week ago, and my sister is fiercely protective of her like the good mother she is. We always encounter wolves. We always know how to handle them. It's simple. Put the young in the middle as me and my family gather in a protective circle. I remember my first time being in the middle. Such monstrous animals without reason circling to get a bite out of me. But my mother was not like any other. She took risks, but she knew it was all to keep me and my sister safe. This being my first time between me and the wolves, I was ready. My mother beside me guiding me on how to handle them correctly. She told me, "It's okay if I made a mistake. Just don't keep your eyes off them. Just don't keep your eyes off them." That quote I kept in the back of my head, constantly reminding me. I look at the familiar face of the monstrous beast wanting to feed on the young and possibly my niece. But these looked odd. Its skin loose and eyes unblinking, its knees touching the ground and its legs. Its legs hairless as its skin a different color. I don't remember a wolf being like that. I looked at my mother, still keeping my eye on the strange wolves still circling around us, and I took the time to ask her, "Do these wolves look odd to you?" She takes a closer look at one of them. "They do." She responds, "Not like the wolves I remember. Why are they not blinking?" "Same question I had," I responded, as I kept my ground frozen from my instincts as I stared at one of them. I look behind me to see if my sister is seeing the same thing as I am, as she seems to be as confused as me. "What is that thing?" I hear my mother scream in fear and running away, urging my family to run away. I haven't turned around yet to see what she was seeing as I turn to look at the wolf again, only to see it on its hind legs, as it peels its skin off, only to see a flatter face with a hairless body, holding a stick with something sharp at one end, and that thing pointing it at me. I start to run away as a few of them threw their sticks at me, some of them stabbing my back and shoulder blades as I call for my family. In the commotion, I heard baby niece call for my sister. Couldn't find my niece, either, since it was too dangerous for her or her niece to get back together. I spotted my niece almost get attacked by those things, but I protected her and took her under me. I hear them call back. A sliver of hope. As I go to their direction with my niece out of the bushes, I see more of those creatures. I got startled and ran to the side. If I ran the opposite direction, I would have met the other creatures from before. What are these creatures? Where is my family? I kept running, holding my tiny niece with my trunk. As much as she was heavy, she was too young and tired to be running this much. Until I was stepping on what I thought was a pile of leaves and sticks, but I stupidly fell into one of their traps. They are getting closer. Thankfully, the hole is not very deep, and I'm able to get a foot over and possibly climb out before they're able to catch up to me. I quickly get one foot after the other, getting my front legs and getting my right back leg out of the hole. One more leg, I thought. I almost got my leg out when those creatures came to me, screaming in an unknown and uncanny voices, with their front legs upright and their weapons of wood and rock, stabbing me, trying to get me back in the hole. I may be cornered, but I'm not going down like this. I roar and took a risk, just like my mother did when protecting me. I smacked one of them with my tusk, sending it flying and hitting the ground hard as one of them came over to check on its fallen comrade. In revenge of the moment, one of them throws their stick directly at my eye, making me blind in one of them. But I was still standing, wasn't I? Although the pain was very unbearable, I was still protecting my niece. One of the older creatures scolded the one who hurt my eye in a language I could not understand, but very different from mine. But I assume that's what's happening. It's a very familiar tone of which my mother used to discipline me. I take a moment to look at my niece with my good eye. She looked very scared, and so was I. But I was risking everything to keep her alive as much as I can, even if she dies in the hands of these creatures. I was not going down without a fight. And so this was my first lesson for my niece. That first lesson is to never take your eyes off the enemy. No matter how scared you are, everyone around you is as scared as you. I stomped feet and lifted my head, rearing my tusks, trying to make myself look bigger as I can be. Despite the fear, they hold their ground just like my family. Me and the creatures are not so different from the way they copy us. They are like no other creature I've met. And suddenly, like the thunders of a storm, I hear the familiar roar of my sister hitting and stomping on one of those creatures. It made a terrifying and frightening noise as my sister crushed its ribs inside out. At that moment, I knew that was my sister, my half, my blood. As in the state of shock for the few creatures still alive, I roared with my sister, as the other members of my family roar with us. The creatures ran away with their fallen comrade as I helped my niece out of the hole. She was shaken up, but she was all right nevertheless and reunited with my sister. My mother felt my wounded eye and rubbed it as it healed over time. My niece is 20 years old now. She still uses my method to dealing with the creatures. thought it may not always work. Because today, I saw one use a bone from an animal to make their weapon. Demons, I heard my niece say. And she's not wrong. What's happening to the air? It feels warmer every day. I see those demons adapting every day, and so does my niece. As she's scared if she ever does contribute to motherhood at this time, as the weather and the demons have become stronger. One day I was too weak. I fight back as I say goodbye to my niece and lay down as those creatures come after me. That's when all the hate for them went away, as they were just like me, surviving in this cruel world. One of them with gray hair puts her hand on my forehead, comforting me in my last moments of life, as they all sit beside me and cherishing their soon-to-be meal. I reach my trunk towards the old creature as acceptance of me being ready to go. She nodded and stayed with me until I peacefully passed away. Despite me being the meal of those creatures, I know that it will end it in the stomach of the smaller offspring, as it reminded me of my niece when she was just a baby. The air doesn't feel so warm anymore. My fear of the ocean was never irrational. My whole life, I have been deathly afraid of anything having to do with deep waters. Even images of ocean blue colors could give me a fright, and don't get me started on the full-blown panic attacks brought on by pictures of giant creatures stalking the depths. I can't tell you why I am so fearful of the ocean. I don't have the answer for that. It's a phobia, an irrational fear. An ironic phobia at that, as my parents are Navy sailors and marine enthusiasts. Alas, I will never join them on a cruise or scuba diving, but I have decided to at least dip my toes in the sea. The Dead Sea, so chosen because it lacks any marine fauna or flora, and because the high salinity makes it difficult to sink beneath the surface. Today, July 15, 20, I stand on the shores of the Dead Sea staring down the tide. My brother and sisters are with me. The sun is bright in the sky. A cool breeze caresses us as we stand along the beach. My siblings waited with bated breath as I slowly put one foot in front of the other until the tip of my toe touched the salty water. My heartbeat increased. Sweat bloomed across my brow. I took a calming breath and another step. My left foot was submerged to the ankle. Fear gripped me in a vice, squeezing my courage until it was as dead as the sea at my toes. I couldn't move, my vision blurred, making it seem like the skies were rapidly darkening. All became silent, still. The breeze that wicked away my nervous perspiration had disappeared. Pain seared through my brain, jumbling my thoughts. Rigid, I stood, praying one of my siblings would rescue me, but I felt alone. My vision focused enough to see that the sky was darkening, not because of a threatening storm, but because a giant miasma gathered on the horizon, churning as it came closer, covering the distance between us in seconds. It loomed above me, twisting and turning a mere inch from my body. I opened my mouth to scream. The second biggest mistake of my life. The miasma dived into my mouth, choking me as it slid down my throat. The taste was salty, creating a thirst that would never be quenched. The massive cloud possessed me, pushing against my bones and organs to fit inside its tiny vessel. I was at the mercy of the darkness now inside of me, a puppet on strings of hunger and hatred. I turned to where my siblings stood frozen in fear. In jerky, hindered movements, I lurched toward them. No matter how hard I tried to stop myself from moving, it was futile, only achieving broken bones that moved against their will. I grabbed my youngest sister, placing my mouth on her throat. I bit down, separating the flesh with my teeth. I drank deep. She wasn't enough. I'm still thirsty.
Thanks for listening. Don't forget to like and subscribe for more chilling content.